The other thing that happened during this time in Saturn, she met her boyfriend, who was her only boyfriend that she had for the entirety of Saturn Dasha. And she met him during her studies abroad. He came from the same country as hers, and they were a couple for the duration of their studies. Now, when we go to the D7, which is the chart of love and partnerships, then we can see that Saturn here is in pretty bad shape. First of all, it starts out in its natural enemy sign, Cancer, and it's weak. It gets separated by Rahu. It's conjunct, debilitated Mars. It's aspected by the Sun in a natural enemy sign that increases the instability in the relationship. And the only help that Saturn really gets is from its Lord, the Moon, who is a manifestor. But we have here three bad influences against one good influences. Okay, and Saturn by itself is also in bad shape. Okay, so Saturn is bad, Mars is debilitated, Rahu is going to increase the confusion, uncertainty, drama, and the Sun can't keep anything together, right? And so this average moon doesn't stand a chance, to cope with all of this. So one might ask, how on earth could during, Saturn, how could Saturn manifest a relationship? In fact, this was her only long-term relationship in the entire Saturn Dasha, okay? And you gotta remember that for anything significant to happen, right in the beginning, the Lord, the Dasha Lord, in this case Saturn, needs to be in own sign dignity or exaltation. Okay. So now there's another exception here that comes with the rule that I said before, that a planet in the 10th house in a Varga is a manifestor, right? And just like planets in own and exaltation are manifestors, similarly the planet in the 10th house also becomes a manifestor right in the beginning of the Dasha. So Saturn here gets completely beat up in Cancer by all these planets here, but he's still a manifestor. And so she ends up getting together with this guy that she never had any feelings for. And much of the reason she stayed with him was because they were from the same city in their home country, and they also had sort of a similar background, a similar family background, and similar aspirations, especially for when they go back home after their studies, right? Because both of their parents had ties to the government, and she particularly knew that the guy will be of benefit for her once they return from their studies, okay? And so we can see here in the D7 that Saturn is in the 11th house, and it is also the 5th Lord. So she basically hoped that his influence, his connections, which is here the 11th house, will help promote her creative projects, okay, which is here the 5th house. And this is also what happened on and off, during, in the course of Saturn Dasha, even though they weren't actually together anymore, because they separated as a couple when they returned home. But still, he remained supportive of her work projects. They lived in the same city, and so he, for the most part, was always supportive towards her. Now, have their interactions ever been harmonious? Never, actually. She despised him, right from the beginning when they met, until basically now. They are still working together on and off, but she just can't stand him. And you can see here that her 7th Lord, Mars, is debilitated in Cancer. And interesting enough, just like her, he has never managed to get married either, right? And so sometimes after a romantic attempt of his fails, he he turns up all of a sudden at her doorstep, gets all emotional, tells her all about it, and just starts crying, right? And so we can see here that the 7th Lord Mars is here with Rahu, and so there's all this sudden emotional drama with her ex-boyfriend. But Saturn also creates here that distance. Saturn is conjunct with the 7th Lord Mars that rules partners and partnerships. And so Saturn creates that distance and literally forbids her from falling in love with them. So now let's move on to Saturn Mercury. Okay. So now let's go back to the deep one. So Mercury manifests the 4th house of home, right? And so in Saturn Mercury, she can't wait to return home after she finished her studies. Now, once she got home though, her life took some unexpected turns and twists, right? Mercury rules Rahu, right? And whenever Rahu is involved, you never know what's coming next. You think you know exactly what's going to happen, and then something completely different happens. Rahu also is conjunct the 11th house of long-term goals and aspirations. And Mercury is here conjunct the 12th house of isolation and spirituality, and is also here in the sign of psychology and happiness, right? And so this Mercury is actually highly introverted and has a tendency to withdraw from mundane life, okay? And so she decided that she wasn't ready yet to face the world. And she left home soon after she returned from her studies and moved into a temple for several years. And we can see here, while this Mercury here manifested the 4th house of her home and family, and she returned home to her home country, to her roots. But Mercury also manifested the 12th house of temples, right? And as the 11th Lord, she ended up joining a huge temple community. Let's also have a look at the D9, which is the important Varga for finding a spiritual teacher and learning about higher knowledge. And here we can see that Saturn is ruled by Mercury. Right? We know there's a rule in Vedic astrology that the Antardasha of the Lord, of the main Dasha Lord, is always going to be a very important period in that Dasha. Sometimes it's the most important, but it is always going to be a period where very important events are going to take place in that Varga. And so here we know right away that Saturn Mercury is going to be highly important for her, for meeting the right people, for meeting a spiritual teacher who can help her understand the higher truth of life and who can elevate her consciousness, right? And so she lived in that spiritual community for the remainder of Saturn Mercury, but then during Saturn Ketu, she started to feel the urge to make an impact in the world. She became, she's very artistic, right? And so she already sort of started thinking about, all the types of, creative projects that she can do. And so, so she got really, really excited about doing her own business and make something happen in the world. So now let's see what's happening in Saturn Ketu. So in the D1, Ketu is conjunct the 5th house of creative endeavors. It's also in Sagittarius, which lends higher meaning to her projects. And Ketu is ruled by Jupiter, who is in Capricorn, the sign of status and achievement. Jupiter is also conjunct the 6th house of work and routine. And during Sadhan Ketu, she moves back in with her parents and takes the first steps towards starting her business. However, Ketu is always a period of ending before something new can start, so never expect something really amazing to start right away. In Ketu Dasha, for that you usually have to wait for the next period, which is Venus Dasha. But still, this Sadhan Ketu period brought a natural conclusion to her spiritual life, we could say. And for that we need to go back again to the D9. We can see here that Ketu is in the 12th Rashi, right? From the Lagna, ruling her spiritual life and life in her spiritual community. And so Ketu here brings a natural ending to that, right? She of course also has to leave her spiritual teacher, the 9th cusp, and she gives up sort of the practices and the lifestyle of a student of a teacher living in that spiritual community, okay? And so she leaves that spiritual community and returns home. And so Sadhan Ketu wasn't really a time for her to have major achievements in her business, but it was definitely a time to say goodbye to her friends, to her teachers, and move back home. So always expect that for things to get properly kicked off and for there to be some major breakthroughs or major successes to happen, they will all be in the following Venus Dasha.